Hey everyone, welcome back to the second episodes of Boots N Brews, and this time I'm actually wearing boots. On the last episode, the only criticism I got was some people who were dissatisfied with my choice of alcohol. So this time we went with a Scotch-style ale from Madison River Brewing Company here in Montana. And as I said, this is the second edition of Boots N Brews, coming to you semi-live from the Drunkin Marmot Studios, otherwise known as my apartment. If you'd like this to be real live for real, I just have to make 1,000 subscribers, so tell your friends and have them subscribe. So today we're going to go ahead and answer a few more questions, and then, of course, at the end of answering those questions, we'll get to the drawing of the winner for the MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe Stove. Nice $70 value for a winner. So before I start answering the questions, I'll talk a little bit about what's kind of coming up next. I'm excited to start a new series here with October coming up, and I'm going to try to do some spooky stories. I have some spooky stories from Yellowstone I want to relay, and hopefully some more Montana specific, and then maybe some backpacking specific stories. I absolutely love Halloween, and I love scary stories. I love fall, so I think it'd be fun to maybe get some of the guys together, sit around a campfire, and tell some stories. Also have some gear reviews coming up. The much anticipated end of the season review of my Western Mountaineering Astrolite top quilt, which I still keep getting quite a few questions about on that. So I'm definitely going to do a follow-up of that, and there is a question about that here today, which I'll talk a little bit more about it. A couple other pieces of gear, and then I am going to attempt to approach the cooking series with food dehydrator. So I'm going to get that out, dust it off, and do up some fun cooking things throughout the winter. All right, so let's dive into your questions. The first question I received from 3388 was, do you use a compass? The short answer to that is yes, I do. I am a big advocate of making sure that you bring a compass with you and a map on trips. That being said, have I had to use one in recent years? Not really. For two reasons. One, I'm not above admitting that I do in fact use my phone and the navigational stuff that comes with my InReach. Those have been very valuable tools. But the main reason why I suggest people take a map and compass and know how to use them is that if your device fails, gets lost, batteries die, whatever, without a backup, you're kind of in trouble. I do use a map pretty regularly. I consider myself to be pretty proficient at dead reckoning. So again, I have the compass there if I need it. It's not been a necessary tool, but I do believe it is something that's important to keep with your kit just in case. All right. The next question comes from Papa Bruce Hiking. I love his channel. Great guy. He asked, where did you get that cool cup? So I have to assume he means my Sea to Summit X mug, which I actually did get from my store, but I'm pretty sure you can get these online or at most other retailers. And it is a collapsible silicone, food grade silicone mug, useful for both hot and cold temperature items. And yeah, it's been great. Not the lightest thing in the world, but pretty indestructible and very compact. It will sit inside the bottom of my pot, and I can still usually get a fuel canister in there as well. So yeah, definitely a really cool cup. And who knows, maybe I'll give one of these away next. They have a whole line of these, plates, bowls, mugs. They have a smaller version of this called the X Cup. They even have a foldable version of pour over coffee for all of you coffee freaks out there. So definitely a cool product. Thanks for that question, Papa Bruce. Again, love your channel. One of my other favorite channels, Outside Comfort Zone, asked, how do you choose your route and how do you plan for elevation and terrain? Well, short answer, not very well, as I found out on this last trip. So this last trip that I went on, I cheated a little bit. My route was actually picked by Jay, or Phantom, the other gentleman who was in the trip, who worked for 27 years there as a wilderness ranger, who I dedicated the video to. He is still alive and kicking. He's probably doing better than I am at his age. But he actually chose that route. Generally speaking, a lot of routes that I choose are either suggested to me by friends or even customers, or sometimes just a matter of sitting down and perusing maps and try to come up with some sort of thing that looks good, and then running that by people who have maybe hiked in the area and kind of know the stuff a little bit better. This route, we did try to plan for elevation and terrain, and I would say we greatly underestimated the climbs that were involved. Jay had a better idea, but I think youthful ignorance caused Connor and I, or Hot Pants and myself, to kind of think that it wasn't going to be quite as bad as it was, and it was pretty tough. It was a brutal but a rewarding trip. And again, you can try to account for those things by, there's a couple different resources you can use. Topographical maps is a pretty easy one. And then also using 3D flyovers of trails. I think a hiking project, you can do 3D visuals, which can be helpful, but sometimes also are still a little bit misleading because, again, that 3D rendering doesn't always look the best. I would say having a really good knowledge of topographical maps and how to read them and how to equate them. And then what I failed is really, really critically assessing your own abilities and making sure that you have realistic expectations. We made it. It was fine. There were a couple climbs that admittedly just on paper seemed like they weren't going to be that big a deal. That first day one just didn't seem like it was going to be a big deal, and it was one of the tougher climbs. Still learning, I guess, would be the best way to answer that question. I am still learning how to do those things, so if you guys have any tips for that, leave them in the comments below. The next question comes from Natty N, and they asked, how did your Western Mountaineering Astrolite top quilt perform in the field? What was the lowest temperature you were comfortable at? So again, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail with this, but basically what I have to say is I absolutely love my top quilt. It was one of the best decisions I made. I have to say that people who are expecting it to perform like a regular sleeping bag may have some annoyances with it. There are certainly times, for instance, for me, I notice if I'm on an incline especially, it's very easy because I toss and turn quite a bit to occasionally break the seal and get a little bit of a draft. It's just something you have to be cognizant of. It doesn't by any stretch of the imagination make it uncomfortable, but you have to be a little bit more ingenuitive in figuring out ways to block out those temperatures. Generally speaking, they perform very well. As far as the lowest temperature I was comfortable at, Western Mountaineering is very conservative in their estimates of temperature ratings, and I should have written this down before I did this, but I believe that the Western Mountaineering top quilt is rated at 26 degrees. I've definitely had it below freezing and was perfectly comfortable. I generally always wear long johns and socks when I'm in the sleeping bags anyways. One thing that definitely helped in the colder temperatures is having the secondary hood, which I have a secondary hood, synthetic hood here by Enlightened Equipment. And basically it's just a hood with 3 snaps in the front, and it kind of wraps around your head because the top quilt does not have a hood. In warmer temperatures, I got away with either nothing or just a lightweight skull cap. But those are some things you definitely have to contend with. And again, just making sure that you have it installed right and everything. Generally speaking, very, very happy with it. I intend to use it pretty much as I can. I think my other Western Mountaineering sleeping bag is probably going to be sidelined a little bit more. But overall, very happy with it. Very well performed, very nice and breathable. It did get damp on a couple of occasions, but I was comfortable inside. It did not transfer through, and definitely handled that pretty well as well. So all in all, definitely a good investment if you're willing to deal with some of the differences, we won't call them limitations, but differences of top quilt. So thanks for the question. Jay from Jay Wanders Out asked, how did you get introduced to backpacking? Well, this is an interesting one for me. I think I kind of talked a little bit about it before, but really I'd say that the earliest that I remember being introduced to backpacking was my dad had in our garage hanging on the wall a blue kind of knockoff brand external frame backpack. I always thought it was really cool. And so that was probably my first ever real memory of it. And then eventually got reintroduced to the idea of backpacking through Scouts, Boy Scouts. And that led to a couple of ill-fated early trips where I think I talked about previously, but lots of blisters and overpacked and all kinds of interesting things that normally would cause some issues in the future career, but for me being boneheaded and stubborn, it made me want to do it even more. I guess what I could elaborate on is what changed it from a hobby to a passion of mine, and that's going to have to do more with, to be perfectly honest, some mental health situations. So something I don't always talk about, but I think is important to share is I do live with clinical depression and PTSD from being a former first responder. I'm not going to go into details of it. It doesn't really matter. But I found that my outdoor activities, especially backpacking, really help to continue the treatment of those things. I generally speaking am doing very well. It's been a long journey. I now utilize things like backpacking and YouTube creating, believe it or not, as part of it as well. Things that help me to kind of focus on those aspects and just generally kind of keep some of those symptoms of those disorders at bay. And I'm generally very happy right now. I enjoy it, and that's part of it. So that I think is why it became a passion, because I really got heavily into backpacking while I was still a firefighter on my days off and doing a lot of things around Ohio and Kentucky and those areas where I grew up. It's what's really kind of saved me, I guess you could say, and pushed me into a path that eventually led me to what I'm doing now. And the YouTube part of it is just an opportunity for me to have a creative outlet and to share some of my experience and really gain from a pretty awesome community. A lot of the questions I got were from people who are also YouTube creators that I greatly admire and call friends. So yeah, those are the kind of things that I have gleaned from this wonderful hobby that I've also turned into occupation. Next question, and this is probably one of my favorite questions, came from Beartooth Colt. And he said, I've noticed the bear activity increasing as we get closer to fall. Do you in any way plan differently or change any of your habits that you use in your summer trips? Again, the short answer is yes. So you are right. In the fall, bear activity does tend to increase. Bears are going into a part of their seasonal existence called hyperphagia. And essentially what that means is if hiker hunger was a seasonal disorder, this would be it. It's a period of time where they have increased food and water intake. Obviously, they're preparing for going into their state of torpor. Bears are not true hibernators. Another thing to consider as well is they're not true hibernators. They can be active all year round. Typically, they are not, but it is possible. So, if you do a lot of winter activities, that is also something that you might want to consider. Again, not a major issue, but it is a possibility. So, again, don't change your activity necessarily for it, but something to consider. But during the period of hyperphagia, the bears are definitely going to be a lot more active, and they are going to be a lot more visible. And essentially, again, they're just fattening up for the winter. And so, some of the changes that I make, first off, I want to emphasize that it still doesn't mean that it's a concern that should cause you to be so fearful as to not engage in the activities. It's still pretty safe, but you definitely do have to be a little bit more aware. You should be aware all the time, especially out here in the summertime. Being that we're in grizzly country is definitely a consideration. But during that period of time, there are some things that I definitely do a little bit differently. I am much more cognizant of the taking the necessary steps to be careful around bears, making sure that I'm not eating in the area where my tents are, and that I'm not storing my food in the areas where I eat, things like that. I also probably more likely to take a bear canister during that time over bear bagging, just again to alleviate any issues. And generally, try very hard to do very good bear baggings, but it isn't always the easiest to do. So sometimes carrying a bear canister can be another opportunity to just give you a little bit more safety margin. But anything that you can do to eliminate food smells and things like that are going to be a major thing, because right now the thing that is going to attract them most in the fall is food. An easy score that they can get a bunch of calories in, they're going to be on the lookout for it. Generally speaking, though, from what I understand, the being that has the most to fear during hyperphagia for the bears are moths. They love to eat moths they find in scree fields, so your chances of seeing a bear rummaging around the rocks and stuff and trying to find these moths is a pretty high likelihood. So, in short, take all the same precautions you do normally in bear country, just be a little bit more hyper aware, and also be aware that your chances of running into a bear during that time is a little bit increased. Still very safe if you do all the stuff, but just be more aware. Bryce Liggett asked, are you going to do one of the big three trails, those being either the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, or the Continental Divide Trail? I do plan to do one of the trails. I don't know when. I am preparing for that, trying to save up money and things like that. My goal is to, in the next couple of years sometime, to try to through hike the Pacific Crest Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail is a trail that seems to call my attention the most. And so, yeah, it's something I'm definitely interested in doing. I know a few people who have done the PCT, and it definitely is something that appeals to me. Admittedly, it's a little daunting. Being a weekend warrior, I've never approached anything more than a week-long backpacking trip, and I will be the first to admit that 5 or 6 days into a week-long backpacking trip, I really am excited to get off the trail. So who knows? Maybe I'll succeed, maybe I won't. But yes, the answer to that is I do intend to hike the PCT at some point. Easier to say than do it, though. So, fingers crossed. Wending Our Way asks, do you have any budget suggestions for rain gear? There are definitely a lot of options out there, and I am a firm believer that you don't have to break the bank in order to have good rain gear, or any gear for that matter. That being said, there's a few things that I look at as being something where you kind of get what you pay for, and I would say rain gear is definitely one of those. I've heard a lot of people that say Frog Togs are a really great option that's a little bit lower cost. And I think that that's awesome. They seem to work really well. I've also heard they can be a little bit um, delicate, so to speak. I've heard some people who have ripped the pant legs wide open, torn seams on the shirts and everything, or the jackets. So again, I think it kind of goes down to what your comfort level is versus durability and performance for budget. There are definitely some options out there that are relatively cost effective that are still really good um, quality. One of the ones I've recently come across at our store is the brand Rab, RAB. They're a British company. They do rain gear very well. It's a pretty wet area. And they're generally pretty affordable. I don't know any of the prices off the top of my head, but they're definitely a good brand. Um, Outdoor research can kind of go either way. I do use outdoor research. They tend to be a little bit heavier priced, and some people don't like the feature sets that they have. I have really good luck with them myself, so I continue to use them. Um, and again, there's just other options. Marmot makes some pretty good stuff. Patagonia, they've gone back to all 3 layer waterproofing, so no more 2.5 layers. So they're going to tend to be a little bit heavier than they used to be, but also way more durable. But they do have a fairly decent price tag on them. So again, I would say it probably just depends on what you're willing to sacrifice as far as durability and function. Other things that you could look into would be alternatives to rain suits. I know a lot of people use ponchos, especially the larger tarp type ponchos, because they can be used as a shelter as well as they're large enough typically to cover your pack as well. So you don't have any of that runoff between the body of the pack and the back of your jacket, and they tend to be a little bit more breathable. However, if you get caught in some gusty winds, they can basically open up and may not be as protective. So I don't know if that helps you at all or not, but like I say, definitely look into some of that stuff. Just so you know, with Rab, because they are British, the zipper for the men is going to be on the wrong side. So that might take some getting used to. Half Pint in the Wild asked, if you could travel outside of the country to go backpacking, what/where would your first choice be? Oh man, I don't like questions like these because there's so many places out there that I would absolutely love to go visit. If I had to say anything, in all honesty, I would probably do something in Europe. The idea of doing the kind of like hostel to hostel hopping, and the simple fact that you can pop into a pub while you're out there and grab a couple beers and then head on down the trail is pretty nice and enticing. The other thing is very interesting is Europe, especially like England. A lot of their trails go through private property, and it's just kind of understood that that's a normal thing. So you don't have to worry about being met by an angry shotgun. So yeah, I would say some of those areas. The Alps is definitely an enticing place. Recently, though, I would say outside of the United States, I would really love to check out the Rocky Mountains of Canada. I've been following some videos on that recently with the Great Divide Trail and stuff, and it is stunningly gorgeous. So I guess, even though it's not really an exotic location, I'd have to say Canada. Bresal asked, what is your biggest packing/gear regret on any long trips? Something you think you would use but never did, or just flat out broke? I don't generally like to characterize things as failures or just flat out. I've never had anything that was just flat out just failed on me. Most of my gear replacements happen because I find something better or more suited to me and my needs, or just needed to be replaced because it wore out. So one of my least favorite questions at the store is, what's the best? I don't think there is a best. I think there's different things for different people for different uses. There is one piece of gear or one type of gear that I did try to use in the early 2000s. that just flat did not perform the way that I wanted it to, and that would be bivvies. I'm not a fan of bivvy. I apologize those of you who are. I think they're great for emergency shelter situations, but the problem I have with bivvies is that I think a lot of people think that materials like Gore-Tex are this magical solve all your issues waterproof material that's going to, because it says it's breathable, therefore there's no issue with condensation. And the reality is they are partially breathable. If you've ever spent a long time on a hot day in a Gore-Tex coat, you know that moisture is going to build up on the inside. It does release some of that moisture over time, but it's not going to release all of it. And so the same goes for being inside of a Gore-Tex lined bag. Your sleeping bag is going to get wet. There's going to be condensation that's going to build up on the inside. And I found that I would get wet even when the weather wasn't bad. So for me, it just didn't pan out the way that I wanted it to. And so I went back to using tents. Again, there's nothing wrong with using a bivvy. I know a lot of people really like bivvies. For me, just not a no-go. And that's all. That is all the questions that I got for this giveaway. So what I did, I put everything into everybody's name on a piece of paper and then put it into the bear keg because this is a hiking channel and that's just what I do. So let's see who's going to be the winner of the MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe. A very scientific method. Half Pint in the Wild. Congratulations, you won a Pocket Rocket Deluxe stove. So at this point, you can either direct message me through the Instagram account, which is everyday_backpacker, or you can also email me. I have a channel email, which is everydaybackpacker@gmail.com. So shoot me an email, and we'll try to figure out a way to get that sent off to you. And for the rest of you, thanks again for asking your questions and for joining in. I really appreciate it, and look forward to doing some more videos here in the near future. If you have any other suggestions or things you want to see, throw them in the comments below. And as always, keep hiking on.